The Tale of Dark Forest, Book 1, The Hidden Light, Chapter 1. He wove in and out among the pines, ears pricked and eyes darting, alert for the slightest sound or movement. He leaned against a tree, slouching a little to make himself smaller. It didn't do much difference, tall and gangly as he was. He was golden brown, scattered with spots. His chest was a pale, sandy white color, untouched by the spots. His muzzle was smaller and cat-like. The nose bridge and side of the muzzle accented a darker brown. His eyes were a warm, dark color like wet soil. Rounded ears sprouted from his skull, the tips as black as the rings on his long, thin tail, which peeked out from under his cloak. It was a sleeveless thing of faded brown, the hood hanging on the back. Simple colored clothing on underneath. He was known as a kaida, the slang term for a hybrid, all or mostly coyote and cheetah. He was fairly large for his species. For a moment, the kaida was glancing around nervously, wary of something or someone. It was more evident when he began to duck under branches and shift between trees, always watching for something. He looked everywhere except for one place, and that would be his undoing. He never looked up. His ears twitched suddenly at the sound of cracking branches, foreboding crawling down his spine. He didn't think to look up until a feminine yelp sounded above him, and still all he saw was fabric of a rich purple color, like blackberries, before he was slammed into the ground. He growled at the she creature in annoyance from where he was for her to get up off me, and she shouted back at him from where she laid, sprawled across his back, "You're fine, give me a minute." This went back and forth for an eternity of seconds before she relented. Huffing, she rolled her eyes and got up, allowing him to roll over easily. She held out a paw for him, which he grabbed and hauled himself up. As he stood, he took in her appearance for what felt like the 1,000th time. She was easily an inch or two shorter than him, but also had a stockier build common for her species. She had cream white chest fur and underbelly, the rest of her pelt a dusty dark brown color, spattered with spots and rosettes. If one could see under her rich purple cloak and plain clothing, they would see rosettes clumping together along her spine in an oddly shaped stripe down to her tail. Her tail, was a long, bushy thing with two thick black bands and a large black tip. Her muzzle was broader and a little longer than her friend's, a dark, dusty gray color. Above her eyes, a blue-gray color. On her head rested a set of ears, longer than her friend's, a strange notch or dip on the outer ends, just before the softly pointed tip. They were black, each with a white spot on the back. Her fur was longer and raggedier than the kaida's, but would be considered medium in length. She was a jalf, that is, a jaguar-wolf hybrid. The kaida shook his head, dizzy from the collision. His jalf friend laughed. "By the sons of Arath, Daniel, you'd think someone like you had been rolled down a mountain with a face like that." Daniel scowled at her. "Sorry, almost dying doesn't faze you, Cirrus. I think my life flashed before my eyes. I swear I saw my first snow." Cirrus narrowed her eyes skeptically at him. "Haha, very funny. You were born in winter, Daniel, so you couldn't have remembered your first snow, and I don't weigh that much." He grinned cheekily at her. "I beg to differ. You're denser than iron and gold." She growled at him and held a paw up threateningly. A rushing sound like metal was barely audible as dark, gray claws shot out. Daniel flattened his ears and pointed accusingly at her. "Not fair. I don't have iron claws, only you do. 'Twould be an uneven match." Cirrus turned, sweeping up her cloak abruptly, and spoke over her shoulder. "Then don't talk about how heavy I am. Any other female'd slay you on the spot." She looked the other way, scanning the dark swath of pines. Cupping her paws around her muzzle, she shouted, "Morgan, come out! 'Tis over. We need to set up camp before night sets." Cirrus crossed her arms, waiting. Daniel walked over and stopped beside her, ears pricked. They waited in silence for a solid 5 minutes, when they began to hear some creature hurrying towards them, foregoing any thoughts of silence. Eventually, a figure materialized from the trees, breathing heavily. Morgan was simpler than her two companions, a hybrid also, but much less elaborate. She obviously had fox in her blood, with her black, bushy fur longer than Daniel's and more canid than Cirrus. She had a bushy tail that streamed behind her, but much shorter than her friend's, seeing as it stopped a good few inches away from the ground. Her muzzle was shorter and rounder than a full-blooded fox's, and her eyes were cerulean. Her lanky build was shrouded in a cloak like her companion's, the same shade as her eyes. From her shoulder hung a quiver devoid of arrows and a bow of dark wood. "Sorry," she panted. "I was up a tree. It took some time to get down." Cirrus and Daniel shared a look. Of course she'd been up a tree. They were surprised it hadn't taken longer. Despite being an archer, she was horrible when it came to trees. Daniel muttered something under his breath about crazy she-creatures up trees, and Cirrus looked up with an exasperated sigh. Morgan shuffled her paws in embarrassment. Daniel was known for his playful and humorous nature, contrasted to Cirrus' more serious and protective one, but Morgan was the timid and cautious one of the group. She had no problem doing things she considered dangerous, climbing a tree, as long as they went about the situation in the most careful manner possible, climbing down said tree in agonizingly slowest way possible. She was the level-headed one who looked out for the safety of the group. Cirrus finally shrugged, stating, "At least you're here. We need to pick a good sleeping site and build a fire for dinner. It's almost set time." Daniel began to leave, speaking over his shoulder. "Well, let's get going to the hill spot then. You're burning what little light we have left with your talking. Come on!" Cirrus rolled her eyes, and Morgan giggled, both sprinting suddenly to catch up with the Qaeda. It was an important night after all. Dark Forest was named for its shady pines, growing in abundant clumps and forests around the area. The area consisted of a small valley with large, sloping hills. They sometimes called them mountains, but they were hills, covered in the coniferous trees. The actual town of Dark Forest was a patch of land, sparser with trees than the mountains, where the inhabitants lived. The buildings rested on dusty, dirt-covered ground. It was the only town for many a day's journey. The only other structure was the ruins, which loomed in the distance. The territory of Dark Forest actually stretched outward a few days long. Northwards was the border of other towns and kingdoms, and southwards was the ocean, which none could claim. Not many lived in the further part of the territory, leaving much undisturbed space to traverse through. Dark Forest was mainly undisturbed by outsiders and protected by the current tyrant. Currently, on an open patch of dark grass on the slope of a large hill, Cirrus and her friends sat near a welcome fire, finishing a bird dinner and chatting amicably. Morgan stared into the fire, cerulean eyes awash with thought, and twanging her arrowless bow's string. After a moment she spoke. "So it's tomorrow, huh? It's almost the August season, so it's been a few days since the day of your birth, Cirrus." The Jalf nodded her head once. "Aye, tomorrow we qualify. With you born around April, and Daniel around January, and me in July, we're all over the right age. We can carry weapons of choice, like any a year shy of their second decade." "And we only had to wait a few months for you," Daniel chipped in playfully. She glared painfully back. Growling at him in mock anger, she swore, "Soon as my sword's done, I'm testing it on you." Daniel leaned forward with his paws on his knees, grinning. "You'll have a hard time running me, though. I'll have my own blade to block you with." Before Cirrus could growl a response, Morgan stated calmly, "I'll shoot you both with my arrows before you could draw steel to save argument." She paused a moment, ignoring their annoyed looks, then quickly added, "Not that you'd kill each other anyways. You're far too in love for that." It was well known among the townsfolk that Daniel and Cirrus were quite close. All three had grown as childhood friends, but it was obvious that their closeness was changing into something more romantic. Both became flustered at Morgan's claim, replying over each other, embarrassed more over being called out than their actual feelings. "I don't feel anything for that idiot." As if, who says that maybe as friends, only friends, best friends, like you are to us and we are to you. Yeah. Morgan put up both paws trying to calm them. Okay, I get it. Sheesh, I was only teasing by the sons of Arath. You two get wound up easy. Daniel grimaced sheepishly and Cirrus scowled. They did love each other, truly. What that would turn into they didn't know, but appreciated what they had now. They didn't appreciate Morgan's constant teasing over the matter, though, so of course she saw that as a reason to mess with them. "Anyway," Morgan drawled, "I have the supplies for my arrows. They'll end up being good, strong shafts. What about you two?" Cirrus' eyes lit up, and Daniel pricked his ears in anticipation. Now this was something to talk about. The former grinned, stating, "Well, I thought we could all go to Old Mason's. I'm sure he'll let us use his workspace. I've watched him enough to see how 'tis done." Daniel nodded in agreement. I'll definitely come. We spend many a day at his forge. I've been planning my blade for months. Good thing the forces haven't decided to restrict the place. Who knows what they'd do? Cyrus growled softly, eyes darkening even in the firelight, and Morgan's face contorted angrily. Darkness's army, the forces, were those of age who had been pressed into his service. It seemed as if almost all were as dark-hearted as the monster himself. Although it wasn't illegal to plan or make one's coming-of-age weapon, as soon as it was made, you'd be pressed to become a member of the forces. And if you'd refused, you'd lose your family and then your life by the hands of the captain. Morgan muttered softly, "Maybe they'll force you to join them." Daniel snorted. "Join them? I'd rather fight my way through them and end up slain." Cyrus merely sighed, catching her friend's attention. She lay down on the grass, paused behind her head, and gazed up at the sky. She watched countless stars flicker and twinkle in the thickening blue swath of sky. After a few moments, she spoke. "I want a weapon to protect my friends and family and myself, but I don't really want to kill anyone. That's probably why I hate the forces so much. They're mostly nothing but murderers and torturers. I hope dearly that darkness will be defeated one day. If he were, the forces would disperse and we'd be free from fear. Everyone wouldn't be afraid to fight them off then, and the forces would be too scared to stay with that brute slain. Eventually we'd get peace, and no more innocent would die." Morgan stifled a gasp, but Daniel grunted in agreement. Everyone thought it. They'd only be free if darkness was dead. Cyrus was only the first to say it. The Qaeda got up and went over to his jail friend, settling next to her in the grass. After a moment, he asked her, almost in a whisper, "Then why do you want a weapon if you don't have intention of defeating the bad guy?" Only the crackling of the fire was heard as she thought his question over. A few minutes passed before she answered. "Defeating the bad guy doesn't mean killing them, Daniel. No weapon is for murder. Yes, it can kill, but it doesn't have to. I want to protect the people I care about, not kill those I hate." "But if it came to it?" Morgan piped up, her voice quavering a bit. Cyrus took a moment to think again, whiskers twitching, and tail flicking ever so slightly. After another small eternity, she spoke again, shrugging. "Dunno. We'll have to see when the time comes. You can never know what'll happen in the future. You can only hope you're strong enough to do the right thing." No one spoke after that, silently gazing at the stars and musing in their own minds the discussion. Smoke hazily drifted to the shatter-strewn stars, the fire dwindling as their friends fell ever deeper into sleep. They became draped in shadow, the only light being the myriad of cold stars submerged in a deep blue sky. The Tale of Dark Forest